Good morning, everyone. Our next briefing is on CCN and growth.
Good morning, everyone. So this is really going to be the start of this conversation. I expect we're going to have several briefings in regards to this, but this is our first one. So I wanted to start by showing you what our growth looks like right now. The picture is showing the USAs over the past 10 plus years that we have approved. And the numbers themselves don't quite match the map because I wanted to focus in when we refined in the last impact fee study, 2018-2019 timeframe. We looked at the EDUs, we looked at our water usage, but we looked at what was coming in. And right now, this is on paper, our paper growth. Our EDUs, our commitments are coming in at about 4.4% for water and 4.3% for wastewater. Now, you may recall from Doug and Cecilia's recent budget presentations, our connection rate right now is at about 2.2%. So the EDU commitments that are coming in through USAs, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what a USA is, they're almost double than what we're actually seeing in terms of those number of connections. And one other thing, really quick, that I wanted to highlight on this map is you see where the growth is happening within our system. And you see that tremendous growth on the far west side. Just tremendous growth that's happening really all the way to 211 Medina County. So what is a utility service agreement? Ultimately, what it is an agreement between SAWS and the developer on what the capacity needs are. The water and wastewater needs are for a tract, and it's for up to a 15-year term. And there are things that the developer has to do along the way to meet that 15-year term. And if they don't, then it could expire earlier. It could expire at 3 years, at 7 years, or at 15. And along the way, if they get to that 15-year term, then we can enter a new USA if they haven't yet met their development. It identifies the infrastructure needed for the development. It identifies the impact fees that need to be paid in order to get service and to get their meters on site. Ultimately, the goal of the utility service agreement, the goal of my group is for growth to pay for growth. We look at the developer to bring on their own pipes in order to connect to our system, and that oversizing, while sometimes we share, when we share, we recoup those funds through impact fees. So that way, that cost of growth is not put on our existing ratepayers. So, Bexar County, I wanted to just kind of show you some of the challenges that we face. When we look at the ETJ line, and in the white in the middle is our CCN. And just a reminder of what the ETJ, or extraterritorial jurisdiction, is. It's unincorporated land within 5 miles of city boundaries. It enables the city to extend regulations to adjacent land where development can affect quality of life within the city. It ensures subdivisions that may be annexed in the future meet certain minimum requirements. And within the ETJ, SAWS has the first right of refusal if we don't have CCN in that area. That's an important note, where if we've had some developers who come in, if it's in the ETJ, we have to say no first before someone else, or they can go and pursue their own CCN. Someone else can serve, or they pursue their own CCN. They have to come to us first. So now we put on our water CCN. And just as a reminder, CCN, Certificate of Convenience and Necessity, it provides an exclusive right and obligation to serve a specified area. And the PUC can revoke a CCN if a provider fails to provide service or impose penalty for refusing service. So within our CCN, again, we are obligated to provide service. And you will see those little white blotches in here, and that denotes military installations and suburban cities that have their own separate water CCN. So we layer on top of our water CCN our sewer CCN. The main thing I'd like to point out here is the gaps. We have gaps between our wastewater and water CCN. We have gaps between our CCN and the ETJ. In addition, we serve outside of Bexar County. You will see our CCN extends into Atascosa, into Kendall, into Comal, into Medina counties. So the policy that we need to discuss with the board is how do we address the gaps? I think that's where most of the questions come up, is from the gaps. How do we address the gaps that are within the city's ETJ, but yet outside SAWS CCN? Or what about the gaps where the water and wastewater CCN don't match? Do we want to provide service outside of Bexar County? Do we want to provide service outside the ETJ? So I'm coming back to my trusty map because I want to give some recent examples. We're going to start with the Gates Tract. This one was approved spring of 2020. This is southeast Bexar County in the ETJ, outside of our sewer CCN, outside of water. Someone else is providing water to this tract, but they came to us for sewer. Again, with it being an ETJ, we have to say no before they can pursue some other option. We looked at it. We have had conversations with the county. We know tremendous growth is coming into that area. Sarah serves just north of this area, north of 87, but this is no man's land CCN. It made sense for SAWS to provide service. This is not an environmentally sensitive area. We brought a lift station, and we brought now many USAs in this area with oversized infrastructure in order to serve. I want to highlight this area. It's in Comal County, the FM 3009 tract. Comal ISD built a high school. It's within our CCN. We provided water service. We extended a water main to this tract, but when it came to wastewater, it was going to be very cost prohibitive for the developer, for the high school, as well as for SAWS to provide service. Crossing the Cibolo Creek was going to require multiple lift stations and create multiple difficulties in terms of service. Ultimately, we let them provide their own on-site treatment in order to provide wastewater service. You may recall the Vantage at Fair Oaks tract that came before the board in fall of 2020. This is inside the ETJ, but outside both of our water and wastewater CCN. It's literally sandwiched right in between this one vacant spot within our CCN. It was adjacent to our infrastructure. We brought it before the board. I know there were several concerns, and we looked at adding measures within the utility service agreement to meet drought restrictions, and ultimately we moved forward with the USA for this tract. And finally, the Guajolote Ranch tract, which y'all have heard some more about today from some concerned landowners. This tract, it is in our water CCN. So with it being in our water CCN, we have an obligation to provide water service. I just want to put that out there. We are obligated. It's in our CCN to provide water service. The question that came up was about wastewater. They came to us, of course, because it's in the ETJ, asking about wastewater service. It is far from existing infrastructure, so the question came up of what's the best method for the environment, for SAWS, for the community, for them to move forward. As we discussed with the board last month, we don't believe extending sewer lines to this tract is that best path forward. So what are some areas that I'd like to highlight of our CCN that we need to have further discussion on? Let's start with that southeast area. We talked a little bit about it at that last board meeting. We know there's explosive growth coming to this area. we know it's within the ETJ. Does it make sense that we extend our sewer CCN to the ETJ line? That's something that we need to look at, that we need to talk to the area stakeholders, and ultimately, I think, bring the board a recommendation, but we need certainly your input. The area in Comal County. It is very difficult and cost prohibitive, for us to provide service in this area. Does it make sense for us to pull back our sewer CCN in Comal County? And then we have this area in northwest Bexar County that extends into Kendall County, specifically in northwest Bexar County, where we have water CCN but no wastewater CCN. The item that Bobby briefed you on, again, it shows that quandary that we're in. We're obligated to provide water service, but they're coming to us for a wastewater service as well. And in that example, literally they're across I-10 from our sewer main, where they could very easily connect. But the questions that we have is, do we want to just continue to consider these on a case-by-case basis? Because of the concern of the environmental sensitivity of this area, do we want a policy that we're just not going to provide sewer service there? Do we want to look at modifying our CCN in this area? In addition, Kendall County, which is at the very edge of that circle, questions are coming up. You also heard that during public comment about our service to Kendall County. And I understand there may be a potential request for dual certification in that area. All considerations that we need to look at moving forward. The process to amend CCN is not an easy one, though. I want to say that up front. And it's not a process that SAWS can control. We will submit an application to PUC at board's direction to withdraw or expand CCN, but then a notice is sent to interested parties. And any of those parties could ultimately protest. A PUC then may refer a hearing to an administrative law judge, and the judge would make a recommendation. The PUC makes a determination, and if the applicant isn't happy with that determination, they can appeal that, but it's got to be in a Travis County courtroom. So ultimately, the timing, and it could be years before you have a decision, as well as that decision itself, are within the authority of the PUC or the judicial system. So there has been, on a staff level, we have been talking with the city planning department in terms of the annexation and growth policy. The mayor has been part of those discussions as well. Ultimately, what we hear from the board and from a staff level, we are looking for guidance from the city ultimately on some of the specific concerns that you're hearing regarding density, regarding growth in the ETJ. What also comes before the city is approval of special funding districts. And I put this map on here to show some of the special funding districts that the city has recently approved. And you may recognize we've had some USAs in this area. And I know there have been some questions from the board as to the timing of why a USA comes before the board before it goes to council. And the reason is cost-driven. The developer needs to be able to determine what the cost of service is for providing utilities before they can determine how much they need and what that funding district looks like. So we are that first stop. There have been some questions about control and authority, what SAWS control and authority versus the cities. SAWS role is to provide water and sewer service within the CCN. We set regulations and specifications for service, and we have the first right of refusal within the ETJ. We do have discretion to provide service outside the CCN, and when we do so, we seek compliance with our utility and service regulations. However, the city has authority on a lot of these land use regulations, on platting and zoning. I know the question specifically has come up on water conservation restrictions. And within corporate city limits, certainly the city has that's right, as well as to customers of SAWS within the ETJ. So where do we go from here? Again, this is our initial discussion. I see more to come as we refine and we hear your concerns and we get some stakeholder input. So we have talked about having a stakeholder process on possible CCN revision, starting initially with those 3 areas that I highlighted before. We are having continued coordination with the city on policy guidance as they work through the annexation and growth policy. We will be updating the board on the status throughout this process. However, until this process is finalized, these developers keep coming. They're still coming with their requests. You see the rate of growth in our community. So what we'd like to do is to continue to bring the USAs to the board for consideration on an individual basis until we have that policy completed. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you give us any insight on the schedule that the city has for its process?
We were updated yesterday, and my understanding is they are looking to have the process and a draft wrapped up by the summertime with the intent of taking it to the Planning Commission and to council in the fall with a full adoption desired by the end of the year.
By the end of the year for '22?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then any further, staff may not have had an opportunity to already think through this, but the stakeholder process that you're referencing for the areas that you identified today as potential, the gap areas. So I would imagine there could likely be other areas identified or other gaps identified. What does that stakeholder process look like? Or have you had an opportunity to really think through what that stakeholder process would look like?
I've had some preliminary discussions with Gavino Ramos. He will be helping. You don't want engineers handling the stakeholder process, is all I have to say. So he has already looked at and given me some guidance. We are putting a list together of who are the people that we need to bring to the table, and do we need to bring in maybe a third-party facilitator who can help us organize the thoughts. So we just really started formation of that plan. I expect it's going to be a separate process for the different geographical areas.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think it's important to look at. I know it will be a very complex issue and maybe a very emotional issue, but you know, I think we see across the time city staff actually reaches out and asks for guidance from SAWS on some of the decisions they need to make and vice versa. And so I think it's a very timely discussion, and I think it's one that's very needed. And I certainly look at the future as a goal of trying to provide a decision matrix for staff so that as you go forward, the board has weighed in, the city has weighed in, and we can give you guidance on how we would like to grow those, being in the best interest of our customers as well as the best interest of the community in terms of density and growth and those kinds of issues. But moreover, to give the staff the guidance you need to weigh those proposals and projects as they're presented to you in these very complex areas. So I appreciate you bringing this forward, and I look forward to the future discussions. And I look forward to getting feedback through that stakeholder process.
Yes, ma'am, as do we.
Are there
Madam
other
Chair?
comments? Yes, I have Trustee McGee, I have Trustee Pata, and the Mayor. Trustee McGee?
Thank you. Yeah, just real quick, Andrea, and if you mentioned this and I missed it, I apologize. But so you just talked about the process of amending the CCN, and it seemed like a really long process. I think you just said it could take years. What's the process for establishing a CCN? Does it take the same amount of time?
Yes, sir. We have to do an application ultimately, and there's the same public hearing process, so it could take multiple years.
So it's basically the same process, just in reverse.
Yes, sir.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. McGee, I will add that if there's no protest, such as maybe in southeast San Antonio, where there's no current sensitive areas, it may be a lot quicker, not years.
Well, so if we had a particular CCN that we wanted to withdraw from, and there was no protest, and all parties were in consensus with that, is it a year-long process, or is it multiple months? I mean, how fast could it be done?
I will defer to Keith Martin.
Good morning, Mayor, Chair, Board of Trustees. Trustee McGee, if everybody agrees up front, you can expect it to take approximately 6 months. It doesn't happen quicker than 6 months. If it's protested, then that could extend it to 2 years pretty easily. So,
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Okay, Trustee Potter?
Andrea, thank you. This is a very welcome conversation to have, and thank you, Mayor, for your leadership of getting this going on the city side. Andrea, I had a few questions. I don't know if I heard well at the beginning. In the slide that says we've been growing at about 4%, they have been increasing about 4% on soil and water and wastewater. Then you mentioned almost double. And is this that in 2021 was almost double than 4%, or 4% is almost double than before?
What I meant to say was our actual connection rate that we're seeing through the budget, so new meters installed, is about 2.2%.
Gotcha.
So the USAs, which are just that paper commitment, are almost double what our actual number is.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Regarding your map, which was very useful, this first portion of the map here, I guess this doesn't show infill development, right? It's just because when people apply for USA, it's usually a newer. Will that show infill or just?
It does.
new?
You see a few blotches on the inner city. Largely, the issue with infill development is we'll have a USA. The infrastructure requirement won't be as great, but we will still require a USA if they're requesting new service, requesting more than what was historically there, completely redeveloping the site. So we do require that. And you do see a little bit of that reflected in this map. It's just, it's not as dramatic as
Right.
these large tracts that you see in
Very
the
good.
outskirts.
My last question is, now I'm going to this map that has the circles that you're studying. I was wondering of this area on the southeast, where it seems to be inside the CCN, and we serve wastewater, but we don't have water. And it's usually backwards. So I'm wondering, we don't want to study that to see if we can provide water?
If I would have added a fourth circle, that would have been it. I was trying to keep things complicated. Historically, we have not seen a lot of requests coming yet from this area. I think "yet" is the operative word. One of the challenges is that we do have the MRSO, Medina River Sewer Outfall trunk line that goes through here. And so it does make sense for us to keep that CCN. Atascosa Rural Water provides water in that area, so we can't necessarily come in and provide water. But it does make sense that we continue to provide wastewater. The ultimate question I think that's going to come in is, what is the density and land use for that area? But historically, so far, we're not seeing a lot of growth come there yet.
Trustee Parra, those three were just examples. Throughout the system, we're going to have recommendations to y'all, because we don't want to just say these are the only 3 areas that are in controversy. There's areas like that, but throughout the whole service area, we will bring those to you, to the board.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor?
Thank you, Andrea, for the presentation. It's a great overview. I hold on to the belief that growth goes where it's least constrained. And there's cost constraints, there's process constraints, political constraints. So if you go back to the map that Trustee Pata was talking about, I think it's slide 2. This is an illustration to me of how best laid plans go to waste. What is the time period for this?
It's about the last 10 years.
Okay.
more or less.
Well, in the last 10 years, there's been a relative, if not a specific push to encourage infill development and slow sprawl, because I also believe that growth does not pay for itself. I mean, outside of the immediate infrastructure needs that we talk about, we can calculate that, but the costs of sprawl, I think, are pretty well documented, and they continue to have reverberations on every system that we have. So we can't stop it, but we can encourage growth where it's more helpful. So I guess, you know, if we look at what's written in plans like SA Tomorrow and, you know, our water management plan, et cetera, what I would hope that we can accomplish through this is getting a level of cooperation I think is pretty unforeseen in Texas politics, but making sure that the CCN conversation that's happening with the stakeholders that are put together is informing the work that DSD and others are doing with the growth management plan, that they're happening at the same time. Because I think if we silo the stakeholder group with the CCN conversation, and they're not also informing what we're talking about with annexation, with growth management policy at large, with the way we're actually considering new UDC amendments, et cetera, we're going to end up with the same picture, which I think is actually probably a better picture than the previous 10 years in terms of growth of the city. But if all of those systems aren't working in concert to do what we say we want to do, which is to discourage sprawl but encourage more infill sustainable growth, then we're wasting our time. I do agree that we need to continue to hear USAs, because I think we've internalized some of these principles. We know where growth is, or we know where, you know, high density development is not going to be very helpful, and you know, we've used the USA process to encourage better patterns and practices on those developments that we do start to service. But I do think, you know, we have to recognize that the world's not going to stop turning for us to finish with this process. But my one ask is, let's continue to get updated here. But SAWS has an incredibly important seat at the table at the city, and I will do my job to make sure that the city knows that, so that it's informing the growth management plan. Because if we have a CCN policy that speaks one language and a city growth policy that speaks another language, then we're wasting our time.
Thank you. And we have been in, with your guidance and with your assistance, we meet bi-monthly with DSD and city planning staff on issues that we see coming. And we do have a seat at the table. We are a key stakeholder in that annexation and growth policy discussion. We will continue with that, Mayor.
Yeah, and I'll just say, to set proper expectations, I'd love for us to figure this out. I think it's probably the most important, but probably most complicated discussion we will have. It would be a lot easier if we had the cooperation of our state leadership too. But, you know, so much of that is going in the opposite direction of what we're trying to accomplish, and we have to recognize that and inform our stakeholders about that constraint as well.
Trustee Hartberger?
Yes, thank you. My thought is very similar to what the chair expressed, which is, you know, Andrea, when I heard you speaking, it was a little bit in absolutes. You know, should we be extending our CCN? Should we be pulling it in? Should we, you know, allow USAs in this area? And I think it's always, unfortunately for you guys, going to be a bit of an ad hoc inquiry. But what I would like to be able to do is this notion of a matrix. And we've already sort of started that process when we extended the conversations to include, you know, the chart that you have that has, you know, Joint Base San Antonio, or, you know, and it has the recharge zone. We then added things like conservation easements. So I think through these conversations, particularly if things are going to come to us before they come to the city, then we can incorporate the desires of what the city and city council have said in our initial review when we have a good understanding of what they are. So, I think that the result of this is going to be a complex matrix that includes essentially a detailed risk benefit analysis that includes the city's desires as well as legal realities like the ones that Keith described. And, is it within the city limits? Is it without the city limits? And so we can even be thinking about it in terms of the rates and the different ways that we bill people depending on location. So I think that the board is learning the complexities of this. And if we can, when we continue to get the feedback from you guys on this interaction with the city, we'll be able to create in partnership with staff, a matrix that you will have a pretty good idea of how we feel about things when you come to us. And if you don't, you certainly will be providing us with all the information to sort of move on one side or the other. So, I don't think that it's ever going to be a yes, no category in categories, but I think that we can use those categories to help guide the individual USA inquiries. So I'm happy to help however I can in developing that matrices when the timing for that is correct. But that's ultimately what I would love to see as well.
Any further comments for staff? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.